Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and particularly to you members of the media gathered here this morning at our behest, giving us an opportunity as a government to communicate with you, the national community, on very recent developments as it pertains to national security. I have here with me the Acting Attorney General, Minister Stuart Young, and together we will indicate to you the rationale and the purpose that we would have considered in the decision that was taken to place Trinidad and Tobago in a state of public emergency. And therefore, I would like to introduce Minister Young, the Acting Attorney General, to develop the theme. Minister Young.
Thank you very much, Minister Hines. And good morning to you, the members of the media and the wider listening and viewing public of Trinidad and Tobago. As you would all be aware, the declaration and the calling of a public state of emergency is something that is not taken lightly, and certainly it is not something that is taken lightly by this government that has now been in power for just under 10 years. You all hearing me now? Apologies, it appears as though there was some audio problem. As I was saying, as you would all be aware, the declaration and the calling of a public state of emergency is not something that should be taken lightly, or something that this government certainly takes lightly at all. In fact, in the last just under 10 years that we have been the government in power, it has always been something that has been under consideration for the purposes of dealing with national security. So I'd like to put to rest immediately at the outset any concept or any mischief, as I'm aware, must be taking place with suggestions that this decision that was taken by the National Security Council in the wee hours of this morning, based on information that was brought to our attention by the authorities around midnight of this morning, is anything but something that is not of the most serious of implications. In fact, in the consideration of whether to call a state of emergency, one of the factors that we have always considered is that we have absolutely no desire to affect the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. You all would recall the state of emergency that was called for the purposes of COVID, and during the time of COVID, it was always something that was very prevalent, the management of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. The government has worked very hard to ensure that the economy rebuilt itself coming out of COVID, and therefore that is always one of the considerations that we have placed emphasis on in the calling of any public state of emergency. However, the current circumstances that dictated and mandated the necessity of this extreme action that we took this morning with Her Excellency, the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, based on our advice, declaring via proclamation a state of emergency in the wee hours of this morning, was based on information provided to us by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service that, when considered as seriously as it would, dictated to us and mandated to us the necessity to take the action that we have now taken, and to provide you, the public, with as much detail as we can, understanding it's a national security issue, and therefore there will be elements that we cannot provide specific details on. I'd like to provide you all with as much as we can, because it is important that you, the population, understand why this decision was taken. After I do that, I will then get into the legal parameters of how this state of emergency is expected to affect us, the population of Trinidad and Tobago, and to give you the reassurance which will bear out what I started off by saying, that this government will do all that it can, not only to protect the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, but also to protect you, the public citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and the population of Trinidad and Tobago. As you may be aware, so far, as at the time we had to give consideration this morning as to what was taking place in Trinidad and Tobago, there were 61 homicides for the month of December. 61 homicides. Approximately 623 homicides for the year. However, the focus of homicides and this murder rate is not the main reason why the decision was taken to call this state of emergency. Over the last month or so, and in fact building up to this, the government has been concerned about the use of high-powered illegal firearms, high-caliber firearms, including automatic weapons that unfortunately are scourged throughout the whole Caribbean region. And due to the high velocity and high caliber weapons, the 5.56 and the 7.62 caliber weapons, you're seeing that when the miscreants in our society, the criminal element, are utilizing these types of weapons, the AR-15s, the AK-47s, and indiscriminately shooting at persons, sometimes missing their targets and hitting innocent bystanders, there is very little chance of survival due to the velocity and the caliber of these weapons. This has been a major concern, not only for us here in Trinidad and Tobago, but throughout the whole CARICOM region. In the last 48 hours, there was firstly, and where I'm focusing on, are two incidents that were drawn to our attention, and Minister Hines will get into some level of detail at the end. You will recall that on Saturday, just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, outside of the Besson Street Police Station, there was a shooting with the use of a high-caliber automatic weapons. 5.56 shells were recovered afterwards, where one person at the end of it, right outside the Besson Street Police Station, lay dead, and another escaped an attempt on his life, that person being Calvin Lee, who is well known to the law enforcement agencies of Trinidad and Tobago. Within 24 hours thereafter, there was an incident that took place up in Laventille in the Prisgar lands of Laventille, where 6 people were targeted and shot, 5 of whom were then deceased, 1 on the scene and 4 others at the Port of Spain General Hospital a short while later. All intelligence and the information provided to us by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is this was a reprisal shooting, and that there can be expected heightened reprisal activities by the criminal elements in and around certain places in Trinidad and Tobago that immediately warranted and took us out of what we can consider the norm. So in a nutshell, what we were faced with is a decision being provided with the information by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service that there was going to be heightened criminal activity with the expected use of high-powered caliber, high-velocity assault weapons in reprisal attacks between gangs. As we now all know, in these types of incidents, very often, too often for us as a government, innocent people would be affected. As a result of that, and after very careful consideration, the decision was taken by the National Security Council and then transmitted to Her Excellency the President, calling for the declaration and the proclamation of a state of emergency. The TTPS intelligence that was provided to the Minister of National Security, who in turn informed the Minister of National Security, who in turn informed the National Security Council, was that certain criminal gangs, and I will leave out the places where at this stage, but I can say throughout Trinidad and possibly Tobago, are likely to immediately increase their brazen acts of violence in reprisal shootings on a scale so extensive that it threatens persons and will endanger public safety. Accordingly, in those circumstances, the National Security Council was of the considered opinion and considered opinion that it was necessary to advise Her Excellency the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago that a public emergency exists. In accordance with Section 8 of the Constitution, which empowers the President to make a proclamation that a public emergency has arisen as a result of action that has been taken, and these are the important words of the Constitution, as a result of action that has been taken or is immediately threatened by any person or persons of such a nature and on so extensive a scale as to be likely to endanger public safety. As a result of that, Her Excellency the President took our advice and issued the necessary proclamation. After the issuance of a proclamation, what then happens in accordance with the law and the Constitution, pursuant to Section 7 of the Constitution, is the publication of regulations that would govern this period. And that is what I'll spend a bit of time informing you all. The regulations have been drafted and in the process of going through the process now, and within an hour or two after the end of this conference will be made public after Her Excellency the President has been presented with them and they are so published. The first thing I'd like to tell you all is that at this stage the government has taken the decision there is not going to be any curfew. That decision is because the targeting of this national public state of emergency is on those who engage in criminal activity with criminal intent of endangering the public safety through the use of these illegal firearms, both high velocity as well as illegal handguns and the other likes. Those are the persons who are being targeted by this state of emergency. So, unlike 1990 and unlike the 2011 state of emergency, this state of emergency at this time will have no curfew. It will also not seek to affect public meetings, public gatherings, excuse me, and public marches as the states of emergency in 1990 and 2011 for some unknown reason did so affect. This state of emergency, I repeat, is being specifically targeted on the criminal elements and their use and their brazen acts, their use of illegal firearms and their brazen acts of violent criminal activity that are affecting not only the gangs, but also us, the law-abiding citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So there is not going to be any curfew. There is not going to be, at this stage, any restriction on public meetings, public marches, or any meetings of that sort. It is going to be specifically targeted to those engaged in criminal activity. You will see, once the regulations are published, that the Commissioner of Police will have certain powers, prohibitive powers, that she can utilize and that will be utilized via order. The police service will be given additional powers because basically a state of emergency is the suspension of certain constitutional rights. The police service will be given the powers to search premises without warrants, to search persons without warrants who they have suspicions of carrying out criminal activities, a lot of it associated with illegal firearms, and also to detain persons for periods of time. The regulations are setting out the process and the procedure. We're going to have a 48-hour holding period where persons can be held under these regulations. Thereafter, either a magistrate or a senior police officer can make an order of detention for another 7 days whilst evidence is being gathered with respect to persons held under the state of emergency regulations. There will be, it is targeting the unlawful possession of firearms, ammunition, explosives. Persons who are found in the company of anyone with these items will also be detained. As I said, there will be the power to stop and search by the police. They will be allowed to enter and search premises, to stop and search any vessel, vehicle, or individual, whether in a public space or not. They will be able to arrest without a warrant any person suspected has acted or is acting or is about to act in a manner prejudicial to public safety or to public order, or to have committed or is committing or about to commit an offense against the regulations. It will also suspend the ability for bail in the circumstances where you're detained under these regulations and the public emergency. And additionally, as is normal, as happened in 1990 and 2011, in circumstances where national security dictated the need and mandated the necessity of calling of a public state of emergency, the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, under the Chief of Defense Staff, will be put in a ready position to assist and to cooperate with the police service, and a member of the Defense Force, for all purposes of the regulations, will have the powers of a police officer and shall, where acting in accordance with any general or specific special instruction of the Chief of Defense Staff or any superior officer of the force, be given such powers. We will be setting up a tribunal. I have been in contact with the acting Chief Justice of Trinidad and Tobago, Justice of Appeal Barrow, and this regulation with the appropriate schedule will be published, as I say, after this press conference. I'd also like to state, because of course you have persons who are trying to alarm the population, that this calling and this decision to call a public state of emergency is in somehow linked to the recent, what you would have seen, publication of the President's, Her Excellency as Commander-in-Chief, calling out the Defense Force Reserves. That is absolutely false. There is no connection. And in fact, if you go back and trace the history, certainly over the past 2 decades, decade and a half, you will see that it is traditional to call out Defense Force Reserves going into the Christmas period, straight into the Carnival period, because there is an additional need for the Defense Force to supplement the national security services at the time. So at this stage, this calling of the state of emergency, as I said, was based on threats that were provided to us, the National Security Council, information of threats of retaliation by the criminal element. And because of the use of the types of weapons, and we're seeing the brazen type of behavior of these criminal elements in the use of illegal firearms, it necessitated the calling of this public state of emergency, which, as I say, differs significantly from those that were called in 1990 and certainly the 2011 period. The information that was provided to us indicates very clearly a continued level of planning and execution by the criminal element utilizing these illegal firearms that is endangering in a heightened manner the public and our safety. So it is really a heightened situation, and the reprisal, the information on reprisal movements and reprisal planning of reprisal shootings, which would lead to significant danger to the public, that we had to take this decision. We will be following, as you would expect, the Constitution. The regulations will be provided in the next couple hours. Additionally, the necessary statement would be sent to the Parliament by Her Excellency the President within the 3-day period. And thereafter, there will be a sitting of Parliament within the 15-day period that the Constitution mandates and the Constitution sets out for the continuation of this state of emergency. I will take questions after Minister Hines addresses you all on some of the more specifics, because it was Minister Hines who informed our services this morning, in the wee hours of this morning, of the decision that was taken, and once the proclamation had been signed off by Her Excellency, the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much. Minister Hines.
Thank you very much, Minister Young. Some of the serious crimes that we have had to deal with and to face in this country involve home invasions, extortion, demanding money with menaces, threats to one's life, one's family life, threatening arson on businesses, kidnappings, particularly kidnappings for ransom, and of course murders, woundings, and shootings. Recently, and I highlight this to demonstrate for those who wrongly believe that the government is not equally or more concerned than every one of us about what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago, speaking to the national community on behalf of his government, the Prime Minister recently published a statement just a couple days ago. In that statement, he said, and I quote, "The unacceptable high level of violent crime in the country has attracted the consistent attention and not inconsiderable resources of the state. There is much more to be done in very many areas. It was my hope and genuine expectation that the ongoing national effort against violent crime, particularly murders and other violent assaults, would have seen a reduction in the number as we go forward." As much, he went on to say, as much as the police has done, they are required to do much more if the stated objectives are to be attained. The government will continue to provide full support to the police and other agencies and encourages all stakeholders from the home to the courthouse to provide no safe harbor and comfort to the criminal element, which believes that it can plan, execute, and terrorize this nation with impunity. And we have all seen crimes perpetrated with impunity. No mask, no attempt to hide, high daylight in very public places, impunity. He went on to say, in part, "We call on households of interest to get involved in doing more to increase the safety and security we all so desperately need. Special appeals, I make some special appeals. If I make special appeals, they are to the police, that they make the criminals uncomfortable with penetrating methods. To those who know and are doing or saying nothing, stop normalizing criminal conduct in your social life. And to those who share the proceeds of the violent criminal conduct, stop encouraging or shielding your family members and friends who are encouraging criminal conduct." The statement continues, "The government does not believe that we are a nation that cannot get the upper hand on criminal conduct, which has evolved to becoming a major public health issue at this time. But we will all need to do more and even do differently if we are to keep violent criminal conduct where it belongs." I quoted from this statement to demonstrate a couple things. One, that the government, through the lips of the Prime Minister, remains severely, deeply concerned about the circumstances facing you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But I also highlight this to reinforce his appreciation of the fact, because it was the Prime Minister who led a regional consultation at the Hyatt in 2023 in the month of April, I think the 17th of April and the 18th, where we identified not just Trinidad and Tobago, but the region, violence and crime as a public health concern. So he is calling on all of us, treating it the way COVID-19 was handled by all of us, making personal sacrifices, doing things to deal with this matter. It is not about De Nobrega alone. or Muhammad alone, or Heinz alone. It is about all of us. And I heard, much to my pleasure, the very highly educated and spiritually attuned Archbishop Jason Gordon, the Archbishop of Port of Spain. He, in a recent interview with CNC3, endorsed this approach, the public health issue approach, and called equally on all of us. I was quite happy to see that. In my view, he began a conversation, or continued a conversation begun by this government, a conversation that will only take us into positive places. Recently, two youngsters, a 13-year-old, I think, and a 15-year-old, found a firearm in a clothes basket in a house somewhere in South Trinidad. So it is reported. One of them lost his life, a 15-year-old. On that occasion, the police was able to recover the firearm. But from the reports available to me, it has not yet been able to identify who would have made that firearm available for access to those youngsters. And I recall several years ago in the Mova district, one All Year's night, someone on top of the roof of his house discharged a firearm down through the roof, accidentally perhaps, most likely, and the life of a 4-year-old was lost. I don't think the police ever recovered that firearm, nor was able to identify from that household who the perpetrator was. So the Prime Minister's words here are very apposite. Minister Young touched on it. So I want to elucidate just a little more about the communication that we would have received from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, which highlighted, among other things, that on Friday, the 27th of December, last Friday, we lost 2 lives. One gang-related, another arising out of a domestic situation. On Saturday, the 28th, we lost another life, the one referred to earlier, outside of the Bessor Street station, gang-related. And then on Sunday, you would have heard, to take the figure to 9, 5 persons in the Port of Spain area outside in Prisgalands, all of which are gang-related based on the police's classification as the probable causes. And then one in the Eastern Division, the motive is thus far currently unknown. So this escalation over the last 48 hours follows 15 homicides during the 4 days that preceded it, from Monday the 23rd of December 2024 to Thursday the 26th of December 2024. You would have heard from Minister Young the challenges that they explained to us in terms of reprisals and what have you, and the police are interpreting all of this as a virtual outbreak of gang violence affecting and traumatizing the entire society. We get feedback from the public through the media and directly very often, and from all the agencies, about the trauma, the fear that the society has been put in. Let me share with you some of the broader statistics year to date. Well, as at the 26th of December 2024, this is what I have. 551 incidents, murders, but 614 victims. So of the 551 incidents, 614 people would have died, 93 of which were incidents with more than one victim. In particular, for that period, there were 33 double homicides, 8 triple homicides, 4 quadruple homicides and 1 quintuple homicide. As Minister Young would have explained and you would have understood, a lot having to do with the type of weapon and the type of ammunition that is in the theater of these conflicts. A lot of it inter-gang, having nothing to do with you and me, but we are traumatized by it as a society, and in many cases we are innocent bystander victims to it. And with all of the international implications about the state and all of the commentary, quite a serious state of affairs. Woundings and shootings, quite in addition to the murders I've just highlighted to you. So far, 616 incidents of woundings and shootings, meaning where the person, the victim, is shot, but fortunately did not die. And those 616 incidents of wounding and shootings accounted for 713 victims. There is no doubt in my mind that we are dealing with an epidemic. And this is why we're treating this as a public health concern, as I explained earlier. We, at the Ministry of National Security, making our contribution to the deliberations that transpired over the last few hours leading to the declaration of a public emergency, we consider this to be a very necessary and useful development. It will give the police service, supported by the Defense Force, the leverage to fight back against these trends on your behalf, the law-abiding citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The way the regulations are going to be structured, as you would have heard Minister Young elucidate, are intended to deal specifically with the lawless and the lawbreakers, and to allow the law-abiding citizenry, the business operators, individuals, groups, to operate their lives as they would normally and ordinarily do. But by our focus on the criminal elements, they will now be allowed to carry on their lives in the peace that we all deserve, in the peace that we all expect. So this is a welcome development for us in national security. I can tell you that operations are underway. I am aware, out of those operations, that persons who are known to the police and the focus of police attention are being engaged by the police and the Defense Force, all, as we have indicated, in the protection and to create safety and security for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The gangs are a major part of this. So I want to share with you, very briefly, the probable cause statistics as are available to me from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Domestic incidents, 32. Robbery, this is of the murders so far, 60. Revenge, 55. Drug, 84. Altercations, unknown, 29, and other 8, meaning the police understand those 8 that have come out of a need, sometimes in family situations, for financial and property gain, but gangs accounted for 263 of them. 263 of them. So, as a result, we consider that this declaration of a public emergency is to confront the criminals and to allow law enforcement easier access than ordinary to them in light of the crises that they have presented to this country. So, ladies and gentlemen, those things said, we are now available for any questions that you, the members of the media, would have and pose on behalf of the wider national community, and we will seek to bring further clarification as you pose them. Thank you very
Just
much.
before you start that, I just want to bring back, you all have heard from the Minister of National Security where we're at today, but I just want to bring back into focus that we've come here today to deal with this very serious decision that was taken pursuant to Section 8 of the Constitution, based, as you've heard Minister Hines provide some of the evidence in relation to, based on the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service intelligence provided to us, that the criminal gangs, via the use of high-powered assault weapons and other illegal firearms in areas of Trinidad and possibly Tobago, are likely to immediately increase their brazen acts of violence in reprisal shootings on a scale so extensive that it threatens persons and will endanger public safety. The regulations will be published in the next few hours that govern this period, and I'll just repeat before the question time. At this stage, there is no curfew being imposed, nor will you see the regulations, unlike 1990 and 2011, do anything to restrict public marches, public meetings, and things of that nature that were restricted for some reason in 2011, including meetings. The regulations will give these powers to the police service and the defense force of stop, search, seizure, detention. We are in the process working along with the Acting Chief Justice of Trinidad and Tobago in setting up the necessary tribunal, etc., because there are going to be extensive powers of detention with no bail application and no ability to apply for habeas corpus to the High Court once detained under these particular regulations pursuant to Section 7 of the Constitution, a public state of emergency having been so declared. Akash.
Good morning, gentlemen. Akash Samaru, Guardian Media. Before I get into questions about the SOE itself, my first question, where's the Prime Minister? Why isn't he here? As head of the National Security Council on a day with an announcement of such magnitude, I'm just wondering why he wasn't here to address us.
It would not be appropriate for the Prime Minister to be the person coming out as the first instance to talk about a state of emergency. You have the Minister of National Security, who is the conduit and the person advising the National Security Council. And then you have the Attorney General, the Acting Attorney General, who's charged with the responsibility of carrying out the legal implications. The Prime Minister himself was the one who convened us at the late hours of yesterday into midnight and has been completely in tune and discussing it with both Minister Hines and myself and Her Excellency the President throughout the course of the wee hours of the morning when I'm sure most were asleep.
You said it wouldn't be appropriate, but he's head of the National Security Council, not so. So why isn't it appropriate?
Akash, it is obvious that you hold a different opinion. We are dealing with the facts. Right here you have the two members of the cabinet who are charged with the responsibility. One, the legal responsibility, i.e. the Attorney General, and two, the responsibility for national security. So let's move on to the questions, please.
Fair enough. The time frame for the SOE, that will be in the
time frame for the SOE at this stage is pursuant to the Constitution. We will be following that. It is going to be monitored on a daily basis. If the ability to lift the state of emergency arises before the constitutional period, it will be so done. As I said at the outset, this government has had the option of calling a state of emergency for the last 10 years and has avoided that option. But now, based on the information that has been brought to us, we see it as fit and necessary to do so.
Most of the nation is watching this morning, so for those who aren't too familiar with what the Constitution says, can you just let us know?
In the first instance, as I said, we will be going to Parliament within the next 15 days. In the first instance, once it is approved and ratified, so to speak, by the Parliament, it would be for 3 months, and then no further extension. A further extension can be sought, but the aggregate cannot extend beyond 6 months.
You said no curfew. You also said that there was some concern about bystanders being hurt and innocent people being hurt in possible reprisal attacks. So if there's the concern for bystanders and innocent people, you also have nothing to limit movement. Why no curfew in that context?
At this decision, the decision is, as I said at the outset, no curfew. We do not want to limit economic activity. We have to have trust and faith in those who have the responsibility for national security, in particular, our intelligence services and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, who have been informing us that they know these criminal elements, etc. So what they're being provided with by this measure here today, a state of emergency, is additional powers, including powers where constitutional rights have been suspended for those particular offenders who so far have been able to evade them on occasion. So right now it is to give them the ability to do what they need to do.
So given that the TGPS, they know where these people are and it's going to be a targeted approach, any consideration to maybe implement a curfew or limit movement in those areas just for the protection of the innocent people in those communities?
In 2011, as a practicing attorney, I was faced with a dilemma when the then government claimed to have declared a limited state of emergency, a state of emergency limiting it to certain areas. That is illegal and unconstitutional. A state of emergency is over the whole of Trinidad and Tobago. At this stage, there is no legislation in place, nor are we going to test the legislation to put curfews in specific places. I mean, that in itself, if you work it out logically, has very, very limited use, because if you were a member of a criminal gang and unit, I placed a state of emergency in curfew in Port of Spain, would you stay in Port of Spain and wait? You would simply just cross the boundary and to go to somewhere else where there is no curfew. So the curfew would have to be an island-wide, nationwide Trinidad and Tobago curfew to have any usefulness. And at this stage, we don't think there's a need for that. Next.
Jules Brown, TV6 News. To both yourself and Minister Hines, the issue of high-powered weapons is nothing new in terms of homicides that have been committed before the two incidents you mentioned that occurred this weekend. So was the government, the NSC, receiving intelligence prior to this decision? What would have been the threshold specifically between this weekend and, I heard you earlier, but I'm just saying because people have been concerned about this, and you did specify it's not about homicides, but particularly the issue of the weapons. And then during this period, would there be more focus on preventing as many weapons as possible entering Trinidad and Tobago? So
Minister Hines will get to the specifics, but I did notice that you came in a bit late, and you may have been listening, but let me repeat.
Because other traffic on a roadblock, actually. So
because other persons
hearing on the radio.
Other persons like yourself may have missed what we said at the outset. This came after a lot of consideration and the specific facts over the last month that have led us to this. But in particular, the crystallization was the events that have taken place within the last 7 days. So I can repeat it. There have been 61, as at the time when we took this decision in the wee hours of this morning, there were 61 homicides for the month of December. As you just heard Minister Hines point out, there were over 20 in the last few days, including 2 sets of activity, criminal activity, that led to certain deaths. One outside the Besseau Street Police Station, another one in Presgar Lands in Lavantil that took 5 lives. So it is, as we say, not about culling the homicide rate, but because the intelligence that we have been provided with is that there are going to be increased and heightened brazen acts of criminal activity with the use of illegal firearms that is going to endanger public safety through reprisal attacks. So it is this increased and heightened activity that we saw coming out of the last week or so, and in particular the weekend period, Saturday and Sunday, that has led to this. With respect to the high-powered weapons, that is something that has always been, and it's not only limited to this government. All you need to do is do a quick search. You will be seeing the prime ministers of the nearby CARICOM countries Barbados, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, Jamaica, all of the countries, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, are talking about the same unfortunate dilemmas we are having, which has also led to an increased and heightened relationship with the United States of America. You've seen both Minister Hines and the Honorable Prime Minister in the last year or so talking about the types of arrangements that they've engaged, we have engaged as a government, the United States government on, because many of these firearms, the high-powered weapons, the Glock handguns, are unfortunately coming from there. You've had specific legislation passed in the United States Congress targeting now the export, the illegal export of firearms. That came out of their consultations with the CARICOM leaders. Minister Hines can speak to the specifics, because this is, as you'll see from the regulations, targeting criminals and those with illegal firearms. That is the particular area that is being gone after here. Minister Hines can give us some details.
I think it requires further elucidation. I can see a look of satisfaction on this.
Thank you.
I'm also wondering as well, too, you did make mention of the SOE, I believe in 2011, where a large number of persons were detained, I believe under the Anti-Gang Act, but subsequently they were released. I think the DPP said they could not, at the time, could not go forward, etc. Then they subsequently sued the state. This is something that you have raised before.
Yes.
So what assurances can you give the public that there will not be a repeat of anything like that in this SOE?
There are limited assurances I can give. I can only give assurances as to what is within the government's control. We have looked carefully at the regulations, and I can say at the outset, the regulations that were utilized in 1990, limiting public meetings, public marches, meetings, that makes sense. As a citizen, you think about that. In 1990, there was this heightened looting and that type of activity taking place. That didn't exist in 2011. In fact, up to this point in time, unfortunately, we haven't really been provided with satisfactory reasoning. We, in the drafting of the regulations, as you will see in the next couple of hours, have been very careful. None of those movements are being affected. We've deleted from previous regulations, in particular 2011, those types of behaviors. The court has now ruled, so this, in the last hour, Minister Hines has provided the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service with the Court of Appeal case, a case of Earl Eli versus the Attorney General, Ashmead Mohammed versus the Attorney General. This is a Court of Appeal case that talks all about the illegalities and the errors made with the 2011 state of emergency. That has now frontally been provided to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. We at the government level have studied it in our drafting and in the laws that we will pass. However, those who have to carry out the activities during this public state of emergency will best be guided by this decision and just following the law whilst carrying out the duties that we're asking them to carry out under the state of emergency. I am certain that the Minister of National Security and the government will provide the necessary advice and resources in ensuring the success. That is as best as we can do.
There's two things very quickly. One, as you said, no curfew, but of course it is anticipated, as many of us experienced this morning, for example, a roadblock exercise, etc. And those can, of course, delay movement, etc.
Well, a state of emergency, by definition, and the Honorable Prime Minister was reminding us of this morning, a state of emergency, by definition, is going to have inconveniences to us, the law-abiding citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, but it's going to have a lot more inconvenience on those who are engaged in criminal activity, providing the police service and the defense force now with the powers under the regulations to do what they need to do to protect us.
Let me add, and one of the benefits that we will gain from treating this as a public health concern, by virtue of engaging the entire society, just like with COVID-19, allows us to realize that we have to undertake certain sacrifices for the public and for the general good. We were the ones who decided we won't gather, we wouldn't embrace, we wouldn't shake hands, we'll wear masks, we'll use sanitizer. That is the approach you have to take. So there will be some level of inconvenience, but it is for the greater public good. And the public understanding this would be quite willing to make those sacrifices to ensure that they are saved and we are all safer.
I get the impression that this may be part of some, or there'll be an element of intelligence-led exercises and so on. Is it the expectation that in this SOE, to be considered a success by the government, for example, that there will be large seizures of illegal firearms and ammunition? The police have been doing seizures, yes, but in terms of large, what we've seen maybe
for
we had
either of
last
us,
year?
for either of us to respond to that question would be by definition jeopardizing any hopes of success. At this stage, you all please do appreciate the government has put in place a state of emergency. Regulations, as I say, will be published shortly, and that now is to provide those charged with the constitutional responsibility of protecting us and fighting the criminal element with the best possible chance and opportunity to do so. And that, by definition, means the two of us, and certainly many others, limiting what can be said at this stage. There's one further point I'd like to make, which is recognizing, unfortunately, in this day and age, there are many mischief makers, as we saw early this morning. Going forward, the three sources of information that we'd like you all to rely on, three source points of information on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, which you can rely on as being accurate information in this circumstance, are: one, the Ministry of Communications out of the Office of the Prime Minister; two, the Ministry of National Security; and three, when the legal side is involved, the Office of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs. Prior.
Good morning, Prior Bihari, EZPnews.com. Minister Young, you spoke about the high-powered weapons, the AR-15, the AK-47s, the bullets, the 5.66, the 7.62. But these would have come in through our porous borders. We are hearing nothing about stopping these illegal guns and ammunition through our borders.
When you see the regulations, you will see that is an acknowledgement. The government has never shied away from that. As you would have heard, and this morning is not the place, you would have heard both the Minister of National Security as well as the Minister of Finance, who Customs and Excise fall under, taking certain steps, ensuring that those charged with the responsibility take certain steps, including, for example, the procurement of new scanners for the ports, etc., to try and stop that flow. But you will see when you get the regulations that one of the areas during this period of public emergency that orders can be made of and that there will be certain focus on is prohibiting or restricting the possession or use by any person or body of persons of specified articles, which would include the firearms, but also controlling of harbors, ports, territorial waters of Trinidad and Tobago, movement of vessels, transportation by land, air, water, control of transport of persons and things. So there is some element of focus on it. But again, I can't get into the operational specifics because that would jeopardize and lower the chances of success.
We have the New Year coming up, a lot of fireworks would be, the New Year, a lot of fireworks would be used.
This is about the state of emergency.
No, but I mean, would the state of emergency prevent people from using fireworks?
No, my phone, I suspect like yours, has been bombarded by those who are against the use of fireworks. A state of emergency, as I started at the outset, is the highest level of constitutional action that can be taken in the fight. One of the things you can use it is, in the way we're using it now, suspension of constitutional. That's not for dealing with things like fireworks. As the Attorney General, the substantive, said recently, they have drafted certain bills and certain policies, etc., that are currently subject to consultation. There is a cabinet-appointed committee looking at that. I think my personal stance on fireworks is well documented from a few years ago, but today is not about fireworks. Today is about the state of emergency and the seriousness of why we're here, to allow those with the authority to do what they have to do. So I'd like to thank you all very much. Yes, please, because we do need to get on with it.
Can I have one more
Please.
question?
Yeah, go on, a couple more questions.
We go into the carnival period, this 3 months will take us. Do you see the state of emergency affecting the activities of carnival?
One of the decisions taken was in the not having a curfew and in not preventing gatherings of people and movements of people. That is one of the things. But in answer to Akash a few moments ago, it would be silly of me to speculate or to try and predict what is going to happen over the next few weeks into the 3-month period. The government is going to continue monitoring it along with the law enforcement authorities, and if there is an opportunity to lift it at an earlier period, so will be done. If not, we go through the full ambit. As I said to Jule a short while ago, by definition, a state of emergency is going to have inconvenience, but this government is very concerned to ensure the continued economic activity. All right?
Hi, good day, Paula Linder from Newsday. I wanted to find out, is the judiciary being alerted as to, you said that after a 7-day period, a magistrate will have to...
The judiciary will be guided like the rest of us in the regulations and the other laws that will be passed. As I said, I have been in contact with the acting Chief Justice, Justice of Appeal Barrow, because it is his responsibility to set up the tribunal that is part of the constitutional provisions. But the judiciary, like the rest of us, when the regulations come out, would be so guided.
Thank you. Will private security firms, if and how, will they be incorporated into these plans?
At this stage, they will not.
Okay. Will police on leave, etc., be called out? And also, how are we, or what is the plan to deal with criminals who are using police and army uniforms to commit crimes in this instance?
All right. I am aware that there has been a request made of the Commissioner of Police to ask police officers who are on leave to please report to duty. With respect to that second question, that really does not arise here under the state of emergency. It is something the government, like every law-abiding citizen, is concerned about, and we would hope that those charged with the responsibility of both the police service as well as the defense force are doing everything within their power to eradicate that, that position. Okay?
Minister Young, given your government's reluctance to call on SOE in the past, is this an admittance that regular crime-fighting strategies have all failed?
I wouldn't say it's an admittance, as I've been very careful to say, based on the intelligence that's been provided to us and what we were told to expect of this heightened, brazen, violent crime with these illegal firearms, and we've seen the effects last night with 6 people being shot, 5 unfortunately dying as a result of these types of incidents, the reprisals. That is what has governed it. By definition, going to a state of emergency indicates that it is a higher level of concern and significance, and we've resisted it for 10 years, but now, based on what has been provided to us, it would be irresponsible of us not to take this step.
But we've been hearing about high-powered rifles for years now. We've been hearing that most of this country's homicides are gang-related. So what's different now?
Akash, those questions were asked a short while ago. What's different now is I just answered you. It is the intelligence that has been provided to us, the information that has been provided to us, and that we have a responsibility in those circumstances where we're being told, expect a heightened level of brazen reprisal shootings using illegal firearms that is going to endanger the public safety. The decision was taken to take this step.
Minister Hines, you've led this ministry through the country's 2 highest murder rates ever in history. Have you entertained any thoughts of stepping down? You still believe you're the best person to lead this monumentous task?
Akash, in these circumstances, I know it is directed to Minister Hines, and you are directing it to Minister Hines with a specific purpose in mind, as your face shows. So I am saying that we're here to deal with a very important thing, the state of emergency. That has not arisen, and I'd like us to just move on now, as we have to go and get these regulations out. Last question, Jule.
I'll ask in 2 parts then. Part 1, in terms of schools reopening and so on during this period, your message, of course, to parents. There's some concerns,
Absolutely, and I appreciate that question. At this stage, this declaration of a state of emergency does not affect our day-to-day lives, apart from the inconveniences that you will face. I ask the public to please work with the authorities, work with the police service, work with the defense force, because they now have additional powers. Please listen please be guided by their advice, etc. But at this stage, there's no decision affecting commerce, there's no decision affecting education or anything other than what will come out in the regulations.
And the other thing, once the SOE ends, whenever it does, what can you tell the public in terms of, because what happens during, let's say, when you restrict constitutional rights, etc., you have a situation where you may get some successes because of that. But once the SOE ends, we wouldn't want to see an increase or things going back to how it had been. What can you tell the public about that?
Absolutely. There's little that we can tell the public at this stage about it. We are providing the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Defense Force with a significant constitutional tool where I think one of you all said it is going to be targeted operations. Utilize it to the best of your ability to try and protect us, the population. Thank you all very much. I appreciate you all coming out this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.